A short statement to read out here before we start. This meeting has been held remotely and also in person and will be filmed and recorded for live and subsequent broadcast available through the Council's website. The Council is a data controller under the General Data Protection Regulations and Data Protection Act 2018. We broadcast and record Council meetings to fulfil our public task obligation to enable members of the public to observe the democratic process. Data collection during the process will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policies available through the Council's website. Members of the Council are reminded that they should follow the Council's established meeting protocols, including around the use of the chat facility, and that comments made in the chat facility are visible to all participants in the meeting, which may include members of the public who have also received invites to the meeting. Okay, so we're here today to go over our unaudited annual accounts for the year. Oh, sorry, we don't do our apologies and a roll call, please.
We have we've got noted from Councillor McCabe that Councillor McCluskey has been held up at another meeting. So I'm not sure if he'll be able to join once he's free. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll now move to a roll call. Can the following members please indicate if they are present at the meeting, either in person or remotely? Councillor Crowther.
Remotely.
Councillor Curley.
In chamber.
Councillor McCabe.
I'm present remotely.
Councillor McCluskey, we know at the moment. Councillor McCormick.
Remotely.
Councillor Maguire.
Apologies from Councillor Maguire, she's on holiday.
Provost Mackenzie.
In the chamber.
Councillor McVeigh.
Remotely.
Councillor Nelson.
Chambers.
Councillor Reynolds.
Remotely.
Councillor Wilson.
Present in the chambers.
Are there any declarations of interest?
Okay. So the only item on our papers today is unaudited annual accounts for the year ending 31st of March 22. And if I can ask Alan to introduce this and then pass on to Mark.
Thank you, convener, and good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, apologies I can't be in the chambers today after 27 months of avoiding COVID. I got it over the weekend, but hopefully that won't detract from the consideration for members. This is the annual presentation of the unaudited accounts for the previous year for review by the Audit Committee prior to their onward transmission to Audit Scotland by the statutory deadline of the 30th of June. Matt Thompson, for several years now, has done a presentation to the Audit Committee on the key items and issues, and Matt, once the handout, will give that, which will hopefully allow members to get an overview of the Council's financial position and the significant issues in the accounts. And could I just take this opportunity to publicly thank Matt and Jared Smith, who's here for the first time, and the team for all the hard work they've done in producing the accounts by the statutory deadline. The accounts are becoming increasingly more challenging and technical year on year, and with the hybrid and remote working, I think they've done a tremendous job to get the accounts to this stage. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Alan. So, move over to Matt.
Thank you, convener. I'll start with the usual presentation. I know some members will have seen this in previous years, but I appreciate there's a couple of new members as well. So if you don't mind, I will run through it again. I'm just sharing it for you so you can get it on screen. Should people seen that?
No.
Up now. Okay.
Yes.
As Alan says, these are unaudited accounts for 2021-22. So these are unaudited accounts for 2021-22. What I'm going to cover today is I'll run through some of the key documents we've got, the governance and financial statements, take you through a couple of highlights from the accounts, rolling through they're obviously quite a lengthy document, so I'll just pick out the highlights for you, the main points in there, and then obviously just cover quickly the challenges, the risk, and obviously the next steps in the public inspection, what happens over the rest of the summer until the final accounts go. So the first quite lengthy part of the accounts you see is the management commentary. This is essentially an annual report into the workings of the council for the year, give our objectives, our strategy, and it looks back over some of our performance as well. And that's not all financial, some of the non-financial performance is highlighted in there, just to give us a flavour of what we do for the year. And it looks ahead also to some of the challenges and risks, the budget setting, the various risks coming up for the council. And it mirrors a lot of what's happening really in the private sector. It's really to bring us more in line with private sector and give an explanation for our business, if you like, for the year. But it's obviously for a local authority setting. It does include some narrative on our response to the COVID pandemic, although that's cut down a wee bit from last year as we settled down to not normality, obviously, with COVID, but it's become a bit slightly more routine for the council in dealing with that in some ways. We then move on to the main governance statements. Sorry, so I should have said I'm happy to take questions during the presentation or after it, if whatever suits members, if we go along. So happy for that. The annual governance statement, it just gives us the details that we have put in place for the governance of the council. It shows how that happens, and it shows the improvements we'll be looking to undertake and problems that have arisen from prior years. The progress we've made in those. We then move on to the remuneration report, quite a detailed statement. It is only really a note to the accounts, but given some of the information in there, it's fairly high profile. Obviously, there's some individual details put in there, and that's fairly high profile. We then moved into the key statements, the first two, so from pages 29 through to 33, we have the comprehensive income and expenditure statement is more an accountancy income and expenditure statement, and it includes a lot of our accountancy adjustments in there that aren't really including the funding of the council. So in the expending and funding analysis of the couple of pages before that strips these accounting adjustments out and tries to bring us back to the sort of funding position of the council, and that feeds through to the outturn as it's shown in the management commentary and tries to give that link between our actual outturn and our funding. Alan will talk to you about in the members budget working group and the budget process, and how our income and expenditure account looks. We then have the balance sheet on page 34, and then the movement in reserves, which is the sort of technical statement that moves all the money from our income and expenditure into the various different reserves of the council, and then with a cash flow statement. The outturn, see this is in the management commentary, but you can see it, the combination between the income and expenditure and the EFA, but effectively we now have a general fund balance of 39.109 million. That's down 3.7 million from prior years. Of that, a fair chunk of that is earmarked for specific purposes, and that's currently 34.355 million. That's down 4.7 million from previous years. And again, in there, because of the COVID pandemic, we've got a lot of funding in there to do with, initially to do with responding to COVID, and now a lot of that is more to do with recovery from COVID. But we have 9.4 million in COVID earmarked reserves, and that's down 4.2 million from prior years. So what that shows is that the non-COVID earmarked reserves is down 531,000. And this is leaving us with an unallocated portion, so effectively the free reserves that Alan will talk about in the budget process of 4.754 million, and that's an increase of 1 million from prior years. That is approximately 2.38% of our annual running costs, and it's about 754,000 above the 2% level. So there's a wee bit of slack in there, but that's not an awful lot, as you're probably aware through the members budget working group. I have to also highlight that the prior year figures include a restatement of the reserves due to an issue with the prior year unapplied grants last year of 1.165 million, and that's included in all the figures in there. Of that outturn then, effectively we have unused pressures and contingencies of 587,000. We've got service underspends of 967, and we've got some lost income during the year for a net surplus achieved of 1.13 million. Of that service underspends, that's fairly close. In the size of our accounts, it's very close to our outturn that we projected at period 9, I think it was, Alan. It's moved up by £200,000 or £300,000 then, which is not an awful lot in the size of our budget. So that was fairly much on target. And that gives us on decrease in earmarked reserves. Sorry, our surplus is 1.1 million, and along with our net decrease in earmarked reserves gives our general fund decrease of the 3.859 million. In addition to the sort of cash reserves we've got another of other reserves, including the accounts. So the insurance fund, the repairs and renewals fund, capital fund are the main ones. Alan reports on these twice yearly through the capital fund, through the finance strategy, and tells you how they're doing. So they've got various different uses. So the repairs and renewals fund, for instance, has got various money we've got either as downries or grants in prior years that's tucked away, and we use that for maintenance of certain assets. The capital fund is where we store our receipts, and then we release them as and when we need for funding. And that gives our total reserves then of £48 million. In terms of the capital programme, we have spent £21.6 million last year on the usual schools, roads, council offices, and that's an increase of last year. Obviously, last year was fairly well impacted by the COVID pandemic, so it's an increase in last year's spend. The key projects in that is obviously schools at the moment, that's £6 million, but I have to say I think we're coming towards the end of our large school spend. I'm not aware of any other schools needing refurbed, so that will maybe tail away in future years. 4.6 million in roads, 4.2 million in property, and we're starting to see spend down in the City Deal projects. That's on the Ocean Terminal, across the road from the offices. And I think Inch Green will be going on site within the next year or so as well. So we'll start seeing more of our spend through City Deal projects the next year or two. That's partly funded through income from our grants, 12.2 million, and that's mainly from the Scottish Government, either a general grant or from sales receipts. In terms of measuring our capital programme, that's slippage of 1.9 million or 9%, 9.3% from the capital budget. And that is a deterioration last year. Last year we managed to advance £4 million of spend. And I have to say that 1.9 million slippage is after allowing for the write-off of the BPRL loan. Now, this was to do with the refurb of Wallace Place and Princess House in Port Glasgow. It was always the intention that would happen, but we hadn't actually been reporting that as part of the capital programme last year. So that's coming as additional spend at the end of the year. In terms of the balance sheet itself, the net assets have increased by 82 million, which does sound an awful lot. But you see that's made up of, it's the usual suspects. We've spent some money on property and equipment, so our assets have increased. Our banking investments have decreased slightly. The borrowings moved by 10 million. That's to do with funding our spend. But the main increase in here is really the pension liability has decreased significantly by £73.5 million this year. And that's quite a big number in our balance sheet. It's quite volatile, and it does move our balance sheet quite significantly every year. Of that pension position, that's moving about 74% on the pension liability. This is apparently due to the better returns on investment, an increase in our net discount rate, and unfortunately use of the more up-to-date longevity assumptions. That's to do obviously with the life expectancy of our pension recipients. Okay. We also have the common good and trusts in the accounts. The common good has recorded a small surplus in the year. Mostly you'll know that's really outgoings are in various community events, property repairs for the shops in Port Glasgow, and that's offset by income from rents there. And we've now got our usable reserves for the common good at 106,000. That's just slightly above the recommended level of £100,000. And we've got a small surplus budgeted each year. We should be able to keep that there or thereabouts and keep it above the recommended level of 100,000. We also include the group accounts, so we've got Inverclyde Leisure now in as our subsidiary. The Littlest Assets bring in as a subsidiary last year. Common Good and Trust are in the subsidiaries as well. Most of the rest of our group are in as associates. That's the SPT, the Joint Valuation Board, Riverside Inverclyde, they're associates, and they come in as single lines in the group accounts. And the IGB as a joint venture comes in similar to associates. And the IGB is reporting underspend of 13.39 million. And the increased reserves to 28 million, so that's a fairly sizable chunk in our group that's made up of that. The challenges and risks, I don't think that's a surprise to many of you at all, but Alan's estimating the funding gap over the next 3 years to be in the region of 19 million, which is obviously a significant amount. As well as that, with my other hat on, I look after capital, so I have to bring this one in, but the annual allocations we give out to property, IT, roads, the schools, they're currently exceeding the capital grant by nearly £3 million a year. So as well as Alan struggling to balance the revenue funding gap, we've got to fund that extra £3 million every year for capital. And we normally do that from using reserves or from borrowing more money, but that again, that's got an impact on the revenue position as well. So it's quite a challenging position, obviously, over the next few years, as you can see. The timetable now, effectively, the advert's already on our website. With the Audit Committee today, and we now have the public inspection period for a 3-week period in July. We don't normally get that many queries back, but we never know, we get some occasionally, and that's been done online again this year, just to make it, well, it's easy to do that, to be honest. We then have the Audit Scotland in over the summer, from July to September, and we are slipping the full final accounts back to full council back to October. In normal years that would be September, but the COVID regulations are allowing us to slip that slightly. And that's really to allow ourselves, to allow the auditors as well to get in to have a proper look at it. The auditors, I believe, are coming back in the office this year, so it should maybe be a wee bit smoother than last year, although it did work fairly well last year as well, to be fair. And then we'll go to the full council at the end of October with the final set of accounts, with hopefully not many changes this year, but we shall see. That's really the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions on that. So I'll stop sharing just now as well, if you don't mind.
No questions from them?
Convener.
Yes.
Thank you, Matt. Perhaps you can help me with some arithmetic. Can I go to big page 44 in the papers? And in terms of the earmarked reserves, under COVID reserves, but halfway down, you've got 2.6 million, 1.3 million and 2.3 million, which adds up to 6.1 million, 6.3 million. But you said there was 9.4 million in COVID earmarked reserves. Where am I missing the three?
To yourself, Convener, I'd have to double check that, but there will be other smaller reserves in that larger table. So I suspect some of the employment type reserves, that's our idea, may well be tied in with COVID as well. So I might have counted them in the 9.4, but I can double check that for you if you want, Councillor.
Thank you, Matt. Tell me, let's just say it is 9.43. Why should that go to COVID recovery? Why shouldn't it go back to the taxpayer?
Convener, I don't know if I can really comment on that. Most of that would be a policy decision. I think we've made decisions to allocate reserves to that. I don't think there's been much more I can add on that one, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Matt. I understand your answer. Thank you.
Maybe Alan could clarify that a wee bit more.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Wilson. I think the COVID reserves are made up of two specific types of funding. Firstly, there's ring-fence Scottish funding. So there was extra funding for extra teachers, etc. So it has to be spent in the manner to which it was allocated, and the council has plans to spend all that money. Then the second source of funding is the council set aside 4.5 million as a COVID recovery reserve. And as at the year end, there's about £3 million of that has not been spent from what I recall. And that's been getting reported to the Inverclyde Alliance, and the individual committees have been getting updates in terms of progress. So if elected members further down the line, if there was a balance left on that COVID reserve, didn't want to spend it on COVID recovery, that would be a matter that the relevant committee could decide to do. But I'd say the majority of the £9 million is actually Scottish Government ring-fenced funding.
Thank you, Alan. That helps. I also, Matt and Alan, have an observation on page 8, big page 8. The third paragraph from the bottom, it's talking about council operational changes. And it says there that hybrid meetings are now accepted as being here to stay. I don't think this is an issue that's been fully discussed yet. I find that to be a bit of a glib comment. You have, for instance, a significant number of our staff, mainly office staff, working from home. You have our refuse staff, our parks department, our groundworks department, who are not. They're out there at 7 o'clock in the morning working, while you've got at least 1,000 of our staff at home. And it's easier then, you can take your kids to school, etc., etc. So I think that issue, an issue of fairness, needs to be discussed in how we treat all our staff. I think secondly, as far as quasi-judicial bodies are concerned, when you're deciding the future of somebody's house, deciding the future of a taxi driver's job, or in the licensing board, somebody's license that gives them their livelihood. I don't think that can be done through a hybrid method. I think if you've got a motion going forward, which is for the motion is to approve a license and the amendment is to refuse the license, I don't think you can have a blank screen in the corner of the room with somebody there saying amendment, and that might at the end of the day lose somebody their license. So that's just a general observation, Alan. I know that the default position of the CMT seems to be hybrid, and we have discussed it in council, but I think it's something that needs a bit more in-depth reasoning and discussion. Just an observation.
Okay. Alan, would you want to say something on that? See your hands up.
Well, yes, it's a fair challenge from Councillor Wilson, and I wrote this. To be fair to Matt, I wrote the COVID recovery aspects, and what I'm referring to there is in the generality about hybrid working. So it's not just about council meetings and quasi-judicial boards. It's about the way that officers interact, the way that officers meet. Rather than getting a train up to Cosler, we're attending hybrid meetings. So there's a lot of hybrid working and meetings going on in the council, the way it does its business. But Councillor Wilson's correct. I think there's due to be a report back in September 2022 from Ian Strachan, which will allow members to further debate about how council committee meetings and council meetings and quasi-judicial boards are governed.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Councillor McCabe.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's always nice to listen to Councillor Wilson's observations. I'm always fascinated by what he's got to say. A couple of questions from me. First is, I suppose, in terms of accounting practice, accounting treatment, just have there been any significant changes in sort of accounting treatments over the course of the last year or so that affect accounts? And the second question is around the time scale for reporting the final accounts. Obviously, the decision's been sort of made to delay that towards the end of October and trying to rush it to achieve a September deadline. And I can understand the sort of the challenges that as we come out of COVID, etc. So I don't have any difficulty with that. But just in terms of going forward, is the expectation that we will, for the next year, presumably, touch wood, we don't have the same issues with COVID or anything, is the expectation we'll eventually return to the 30th September deadline?
Thank you, Convener. And if the first question, I'll give Matt a chance to think of an answer. I'll deal with the second question first. Yes, the plan is, and I think whilst this isn't, Mark Laird is here from Audit Scotland. He's really here as an observer today, to be fair to Mark. But I know the plan would be that we get back to the 30th September. Before COVID, there was talk of trying to advance the 30th September, more towards the English timescales and the Health Board timescales of considering these things even earlier. But I think the first step is to get us back to the 30th September. And I would think if we achieve the 30th of October or the 27th of October, which is obviously a proposal going to the full council on Thursday, I think both from an Audit Scotland perspective and a council officer perspective, we will have done well to achieve that, and that will be a step forward from last year. If I can hand over to Matt regarding the technical changes.
Mark.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah. I'll probably miss on here, but no, I'm not aware of any huge technical changes this year in the accounts. There was a move to change how we reported in leases, but that's been delayed at least a couple of years. And that's largely the back of COVID. They don't see the need for us to change something unnecessarily while we're all dealing with COVID. So no, there's no significant changes in there.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from members? Not seeing anyone in the chat. No. Okay. So can I ask that we approve the recommendations on page 1?
Great.
Great.
Great. Okay. Right, thank you. Let's close our meeting at that.
Thank you.
That's very good. 26 minutes.
Thank you.